My dad let his sister humiliate my mom and said, "Nothing, that's when I walked away." She called my mom a burden to her face, and he didn't say a word. He let her be shamed without lifting a finger. That silence was the last straw for me. When people talk about their childhood, they often speak with longing. Some remember the warm scent of cinnamon in the kitchen, others the sound of their father's laugh as they chased them around the yard. For the longest time, I believed I had that kind of childhood too. Not perfect, nothing ever is, but warm enough, safe enough. My mother's gentle hands, my father's quiet presence, and my older brother's laughter echoing through our small house. It wasn't until I was 20 years old that I realized how false that image really was. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my mom one evening. She'd made her favorite soup lemongrass and ginger, and the aroma drifted through the house like something sacred. We were talking about my friend Nina, who had just gotten engaged and was planning to move to Europe with her fiancé. I told Mom how lucky Nina was that her parents were supportive, how beautiful it was to have someone cheer you on as you followed your dreams. She smiled faintly, but didn't say anything. I didn't think much of it at first. But then she got up and rummaged through the top cabinet, the one where she kept old documents and family photos. She came back with a yellowing folder and set it down gently on the table. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside were letters, job offers, and travel documents, nursing credentials, visa approvals. One dated nearly 30 years ago. I was supposed to leave too, she said softly. I blinked, unsure I had heard her right. What do you mean I had an offer from a hospital in Canada? A full scholarship, everything arranged. I had packed my suitcase. I even bought a coat for the snow, but you never mentioned I met your father 2 weeks before my departure. She continued, her eyes staring, not at me, but somewhere far away. He begged me not to go, told me he loved me, promised we'd build a life together, and that he would support me in everything, that I didn't have to go that far to find purpose. I stared at the papers. At 20, I thought I knew who my parents were. This woman across from me, my mother, the strongest person I knew, had dreams bigger than the small town we were raised in, dreams that never came true. I gave it all up because I believed him. She whispered, I married him instead. I didn't know what to say. I think I muttered something like, he must have really loved you, but even as I said it, it rang hollow. Her lips pressed together, and she gave me a look I still haven't forgotten. It wasn't love, she said. It was fear. He didn't want to lose me, not because I meant everything to him, but because I was becoming something he couldn't control. That sentence cracked something inside me. Suddenly, 100 moments from my childhood made new ugly sense. The way my dad never came to parent-teacher conferences. The way he barely reacted when I won a scholarship, or when my brother landed in the hospital from stress. The nights Mom worked late and came home only to cook dinner and wash our clothes, while Dad sat in front of the TV, feet up like he'd run a marathon. Back then, I told myself he was just tired. Now I realized he was indifferent. Worse than that. Maybe he had stolen her future and replaced it with a cage. I'm so sorry, Mom, I said, barely able to get the words out. She just smiled and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I don't regret having you or your brother. You two are the only reasons I stayed sane. It was both comforting and devastating to hear. After that night, I couldn't unsee the truth. I had spent years thinking my father was simply quiet, a background figure. But in reality, he had chosen absence, chosen apathy. And my mother, with her boundless energy and quiet resilience, had filled in every gap, financial, emotional, parental. She was the scaffolding that held our crumbling family together, and none of us had ever said thank you. But I didn't hate my father yet. Not then. I was heartbroken, confused, reeling, but not angry. That came later. After that night at the kitchen table, I couldn't look at my father the same way. It was like someone had pulled back the curtain on my life and revealed the crumbling supports holding everything up. My mother's exhausted hands, her sleepless nights, her sacrifices layered on top of each other until they became invisible. What I once interpreted as a quiet man who simply wasn't emotionally expressive now felt like willful neglect. My father wasn't passive, he was deliberately uninvolved. It became glaringly obvious as I looked back on those difficult years when my brother Daniel began to unravel. Daniel was always the golden child. Not because my parents said so, but because I believed it. He was smart, charismatic, and kind. But when he turned 17, something inside him shifted. He became withdrawn. His laughter, the same one that used to echo through the house, faded into silence. He stopped going out with friends. He stopped eating regularly. He'd spend hours sitting in the dark with his headphones on the music, too soft to hear. And my dad, he said, Daniel was just being dramatic. I remember walking into the living room one afternoon and seeing my mom holding Daniel on the floor. He was curled up like a child sobbing, while she whispered soothing words through her own trembling voice. I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching my school bag, unsure whether to step in or run away. That night, my mother called her boss overseas and told her she was coming home. She had been working abroad at the time, sending money, making sure we had everything we needed. My dad had been technically the one in charge during her absence, but I'd known even then it was just her money keeping us afloat. She dropped everything to come back for Daniel. She became his full-time caregiver, his therapist, nurse, teacher, and anchor. She took him to medical appointments, sat through long psychiatric evaluations, and helped him through medication side effects. Meanwhile, my father continued as if nothing had changed. He stayed up late, watching game shows, bought himself a new fishing rod, told neighbors Daniel was lazy and soft. It was more than indifference. It was betrayal. Mom had to sell some of her jewelry to afford Daniel's medication. She borrowed money from friends to pay for his hospital stays. She even tried applying for local government assistance, but was turned away because my father was still listed as the head of household and technically employed through sporadic manual labor. He wasn't working. He hadn't been working for a long time, but he was always buying something, some tool, some gadget, some useless part for his ever-rusting motorcycle project. A project that had been sitting in our garage, untouched for years, except for when he ordered yet another part he'd never use. I once overheard my mother asking him gently, "Could we pause the spending just for a few months? We're behind on the bills." He didn't even look up from his phone. "Don't blame me for your poor budgeting." That was the first time I felt real rage toward him. Not the simmering kind, but the white-hot kind that makes your hands shake. How dare he? How dare he say that to the woman who hadn't bought herself a new pair of shoes in 5 years so we could have textbooks and toothpaste, who missed meals pretending she wasn't hungry just so we didn't notice there wasn't enough. My mother was tired all the time, but she never let it show around Daniel. She smiled for him, braided my hair, cooked everyone's favorite meals on their birthdays, even my father's, who never once thanked her. He never offered to drive Daniel to appointments, never sat in on the family therapy sessions. He didn't care. He made that clear every day. And the house, our little home that Mom tried so hard to keep welcoming, began to feel like a war zone with no fighting, just silence, tension, and exhaustion. There were nights I lay in bed, listening to my mother cry in the bathroom. She always tried to muffle it with the tap running, but I heard it anyway. Her sobs were quiet, but steady like the dripping of a leaky pipe. And still, she got up every morning and made us breakfast. I asked her once why she didn't leave him. It had been after one of those especially cruel comments he made about her spending problem while she was literally figuring out how to stretch one bag of rice for a week. She looked at me with tired eyes and simply said, "Where would I go? Love divorce isn't even legal here, and I couldn't take you two without a fight." I didn't know what to say. I hated that she was right, and I hated that he knew it too, that he could sit comfortably in his chair, spending her money and blaming her for the weight she was carrying on her back. Because he knew she couldn't leave. He'd trapped her, and he knew it. And I started to resent myself for not seeing it sooner, for not doing something. The accident should have been a wake-up call. It happened last year. My father slipped on wet concrete while trying to fix the roof. He shattered his leg in 3 places and cracked a few ribs. The injury wasn't life-threatening, but it left him immobile for weeks. And then, of course, came the real nightmare. Bill's paperwork and a man who refused to help himself in any way that mattered. When I got the call from my mom, she sounded calm, but her voice had that thin, forced steadiness I'd learned to read. "Your father's had an accident," she said. "Don't worry, he's alive, but we'll need some help." Help didn't mean emotional support. It meant money. It meant chores. It meant that my mother, already working full-time as a nurse, would now be responsible for an injured man who hadn't lifted a finger for years. He didn't even try to manage things on his own. Not the insurance, not the follow-ups, not the payments, nothing. The insurance claim was slow to process. There were issues with the paperwork. Of course, he hadn't submitted things properly. Mom had to follow up with the agent 3 times just to correct his birth date. And while the approval dragged on, the hospital bills piled up, then came the medication. Then came the home equipment, crutches, a medical bed, a walker, and it was all on her. She was working back-to-back shifts, often skipping meals, going without sleep. I watched her shoulders curve inward more every day as though her very bones were folding under the strain. Still she came home, changed his bandages, massaged his swollen feet, and spoon-fed him on days he refused to move. And my father, he barely said thank you. He complained about the food, about the pain, about the air conditioner. He shouted at her once for forgetting to refill his pain meds, even though she had left her shift early to pick them up. I remember standing in the hallway that evening, clutching the stair rail as I listened to his voice rise through the door. "You're so bad with money. It's a miracle we aren't homeless." I waited for my mother to speak up to defend herself, but the silence that followed stung worse than any argument. She didn't yell, she didn't even flinch. And then came the moment, the one that broke whatever thread of loyalty I had left toward him. Mom had exhausted every option, so she reached out reluctantly to his sister, Aunt Mila. I wasn't there for the call, but I was very much there when Aunt Mila showed up at our house. She swept in like a tornado, all perfume and judgment. She always had a sharp tongue, but that day it was a blade dipped in venom. "You're asking me for money," Mila sneered as she sat down in our living room. After all these years of handling your own finances so independently, my mother stood quietly, hands folded in front of her, her face composed but pale. "You know," Mila continued, her voice mocking, "maybe if you weren't so irresponsible with spending, this wouldn't have happened. What kind of woman lets her husband get injured and then begs for help like this?" I expected my father to say something, anything, to speak up, to correct her, but he just sat there, not a word. He didn't defend my mother, didn't tell his sister to back off, didn't acknowledge the sacrifices my mom had made for years. He just looked away as if this had nothing to do with him. That's when I snapped. "Excuse me," I said, stepping into the room. My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. She's the only reason this family isn't in ruins. She's the one who fed us, clothed us, paid every damn bill while your brother sat on his ass for years. You're humiliating the wrong person. Aunt Mila's face twisted in offense. "You shouldn't speak to your elders like that, and you shouldn't speak to someone who saved this family more times than I can count, like she's trash." I spat. My father said nothing. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask me to stop. He didn't even blink. That silence, his refusal to defend the woman who had given everything for him, was louder than any scream. I walked out. My hands were trembling, and my vision was blurry with tears, but I couldn't stay in that house. Not after that. Not after watching my mother shrink into herself while he sat there and let it happen. I stayed at a friend's for a few days. My mom texted me every night, just checking in. She didn't ask me to come back. She didn't even talk about what happened, but I knew she was hurting. She still loved him. Or maybe she didn't. But after a lifetime of sacrifice, what was left for her to return to? As for me, I was done pretending. Done playing the respectful daughter. Done tolerating his presence, like it was something we were obligated to accept. I didn't hate him. I just couldn't stand to see what he'd become, and even worse, what he'd always been. I stayed away for 3 days. 3 days of silence, of breathing clean air, of imagining what life could be like, without the weight of him dragging everything down. But reality has a way of creeping back in. On the 4th day, I came home not for him, but for my mom. She greeted me at the door with a hug that lingered longer than usual. Her arms trembled as she held me, and I realized she hadn't had a moment of softness in days, maybe weeks. "I missed you," she whispered. "I missed you too, Mom." We didn't talk about Aunt Mila, or the way my father had sat there complicit in silence, while his sister berated the woman who held this family together. That conversation would come later, or maybe it wouldn't. But her eyes said everything she couldn't. He was still in the living room, leg propped up, remote in hand. He didn't look up when I passed by. Not a word, no apology, no greeting, and I felt nothing. Not rage, not heartbreak, just nothing. I moved through the house like a guest, helping my mom with dinner, tidying up the bathroom, doing the little things I knew would make her life easier. I noticed the overdue bills stacked in a drawer beside the fridge, the scribbled notes she'd made about shifts, groceries, medication refills. Her entire life was being held together by a checklist and sheer willpower. That night, I sat beside her on the balcony. The air was warm and heavy, the kind that made your skin feel sticky, but your heart a little less heavy. I took a breath. "Mom," I began, "I need to tell you something." She looked at me, her face open and gentle, the way it always had been, even when the world gave her no reason to be. "I don't think I can do this anymore," I said, "with him." Her expression didn't change. There was no shock, No surprise, just a softness that deepened. I know, she said quietly. I can't pretend he's a good father or even a decent human being. I can't sit at the same table with him and pretend it's all okay. She nodded slowly, as if she'd been waiting for me to say it aloud. I'll always be here for you. I'll come home. I'll help, but I don't want anything to do with him. Not anymore. She reached for my hand. I don't blame you, she said. You don't have to explain yourself to me. I felt a lump rise in my throat. But what if you stay with him? I asked. What happens then? Her gaze drifted out toward the dark sky, and for the first time, I saw the weariness in her, not just physical, but spiritual, like her soul had aged a decade in the span of a year. In this country, she said, divorce isn't legal. You know that. The only way I can be free of him is to leave him completely. But where would I go? I don't own this house. My name isn't even on it. I felt a cold flush rush through me. You've paid for this house, I said. Everything in it. You've paid the bills, the furniture, the food, his medical care. It's yours. She smiled sadly. Maybe in my heart. Yes, but not on paper, and in this world the paper matters more. I was silent, furious, powerless. She squeezed my hand again. But that doesn't mean you have to live this way. You can choose something different. And there it was, the curse and blessing of being her daughter. She would stay in hell if it meant keeping the roof over our heads, but she would never chain me to the same fate. I want to go. No contact with him, I said. She nodded. I want to come here to see you, not him. I want to spend holidays with you and Daniel, but I won't sit across from that man ever again. She exhaled slowly. Then don't. But how, I whispered. How do I do that without hurting you more? Without cutting off everyone on his side of the family? I still love my cousins. I don't want to lose everything just to get away from him. Her voice was gentle. You don't have to burn the whole tree to remove one rotting branch. She leaned back in her chair, eyes glistening in the dim light. Your cousins are smart. If they love you, they'll understand. And if they don't, that's their choice, not yours. I blinked, overwhelmed by the quiet strength she carried. All my life, I'd thought she was trapped helpless. But now I saw it clearly. She was just surviving, enduring, making the best of an unjust world. I don't want to pretend anymore, I said again. Then don't, she said. Live your truth. That's the one thing he's never taken from you. That night, I drafted a message on my phone, not for my father. He didn't deserve one, but for the group chat with my cousins. Hey guys, I just wanted to be upfront. I'm stepping back from any family events involving my dad. I'm not going to explain all the reasons, but it's for my peace. I love you all and hope we can still see each other, but I won't be around if he's there. No hard feelings if that's too weird for you. Just being honest. The responses trickled in over the next few hours. Some were confused, some were neutral. One cousin replied, I figured something was going on. Respect for doing what's best for you. That was enough. I thought it would feel like freedom, cutting him off, turning the page, finally stepping out of the long shadow my father had cast over our lives. But the truth, it felt quiet, like walking through a house you've lived in your whole life, only to find that all the furniture is gone. No yelling, no cold indifference, no uncomfortable dinners, just silence. Still, it was mine, and I was ready to fill it with something better. The first real shift came with my brother Daniel. We'd grown up like ghosts under the same roof, close in age, but always tiptoeing around the same landmine. Our father, I used to think Daniel was lucky because he didn't try to please our dad the way I did. He didn't seek approval, didn't bend into shapes, just to make the old man look our way. But now I understood. Daniel had stopped trying long before I even started. He'd learned faster. I just hadn't noticed. We reconnected slowly, not with big heart-to-hearts, but in the quiet spaces between things. A shared coffee in the kitchen, swapping playlists, watching dumb videos on our phones while our mom rested between shifts. One night, as we folded laundry together, he said, Mom told me I looked up about Dad. He nodded. That you're done with him, that you won't come around when he's here. I held my breath, unsure what side of the line he stood on. Good, he said simply. It's about time. I exhaled, feeling something uncoil in my chest. Do you hate him? I asked. He didn't answer right away. He folded a t-shirt slowly, then shrugged. I don't think I feel anything. It's like he's just a guy who happened to be around when we were growing up. Not a dad, not really. That hurt more than I expected. but it was also the truest thing either of us had said in years. He let Mom suffer. I said quietly. He used her, and then he humiliated her in front of his sister. Daniel nodded. And he'll never say sorry because he doesn't think he did anything wrong. That was the worst parts. Not the neglect, not even the verbal digs. It was the complete absence of accountability. The black hole where remorse should have been. I'm thinking about moving out, I admitted. Soon I want Mom to come with me, but I know she won't. Daniel's jaw tightened. She won't leave unless she knows she's not abandoning us. She needs to believe we're safe. I want to give her that, I said. So we did. We started picking up the slack, not just around the house, but emotionally. We talked to her more, shared more meals, gave her space to breathe. Slowly, we helped her reclaim parts of herself that had been buried under years of exhaustion. I started taking her out on weekends, just little things, coffee dates, short walks, grocery trips, where she didn't have to remember every coupon and discount code just to get by. One afternoon, while we sat at a small cafe watching people rush past the windows, she said something I'll never forget. You know, she murmured, stirring her tea. There were times I thought I was a bad mother because I couldn't give you a happy home. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. You gave us everything, I said. He's the one who took it all for granted. Tears welled in her eyes. She blinked them away like she always did. I just didn't want you to grow up angry. I'm not angry, I said, surprising even myself. I'm just done pretending. That became my new mantra. Done pretending. I used to think cutting someone off meant hatred, rage, dramatic declarations. But now I understood. It was simply choosing not to bleed for someone who never brought a bandage. I didn't tell my dad I was going no contact. I didn't need to. My absence said everything. He tried to call a few times. Once he even left a voicemail, grumbling something about respect and family. I deleted it before it could settle in my ears. Let him talk to the walls. I started journaling more. Reading again, relearning what it meant to make space for myself without guilt. I stopped checking my tone before speaking. I stopped biting my tongue when I felt something deeply. I began to exist without constantly managing someone else's comfort. Sometimes I still see my cousins, the ones who replied with kindness, who didn't question my decision. We meet for lunch, swap stories, laugh like nothing ever happened. And for those who fell away after I drew my boundary, I let them go too. Not with malice, just acceptance, and my mom. She's still there, still strong, but different now. She laughs more, lets herself rest. Sometimes I catch her humming while she cooks, and it feels like a small miracle every time I know she won't leave him. Not in the legal sense, not while divorce is illegal and her name isn't on the deed, but she's learned to draw her own quiet line. She keeps her conversations short, stops apologizing. She even told Aunt Mila off the last time she called, and the grin she gave me afterward was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. So, no, it's not a perfect ending, but it's a true one. And for the first time in a long time, I've chosen peace, not silence.